All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Mulenga Kapwepwe, and I'm the facilitator of today's webinar, which is a live recap of Leading Ladies, which is a Zambian podcast which looks at historical Zambian women done by the Women's History Museum. So we're in our 4th season of Leading Ladies, and this time around, we're looking at the eco-feminists, who are women who have done amazing and brilliant things in our Zambian history and have contributed to issues to do with environmental protection and the like. So just a few ground rules so that we're on the same page is that if you have any question or any contribution you'd like to make, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll attend to it. If you have any comment, you can also do so by sharing it in the comment section, or rather in the chat section. And just be sure to keep your mics muted as well as your video off throughout the entirety of this webinar. Otherwise, I am joined by someone who does not need any introduction. She is quite a figure in our Zambian art space as well as cultural space. So good afternoon, Mulenga Kapwepwe.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for, for this afternoon, which I hope will be very, very pleasant.
Oh, great. So this particular afternoon, we are supposed to go through the story of Nangoma, who is our leading lady for episode 3 of season 4. So perhaps I would also just want to dive straight into the story of her. And just at the beginning of Nangoma's story, we learned that she was actually stopped from getting married to a Mwetwa man who she happened to have fallen in love with. So the whole purpose of this webinar is so that we can dive deeper into the story. So could you hopefully just explain to us a little bit more about what kind of issue kind of stopped that from happening?
Well, you know, in the olden days, I think your marriage choice, I guess, was subject to everybody. You know, everybody had an input in whether they thought that person was good for you or not good for you. And I think for Nangoma, that particular Mwetwa man was deemed not quite right for her by her family. And they said, no, you can't marry this man. So she obviously was in love with him, but the family said no, because they didn't think that he was the right man for her. And she had to abide by that choice by her family. From what I gather, she wasn't very happy about not having that, to marry, not being allowed to marry that man, but she complied with the wishes of her family.
Right, interesting. I see. Well, I guess that does now shed a little bit more light on that particular part of the story. I think another thing that actually we had noticed or that we came across after releasing this particular episode is there was a comment that spoke about how Nangoma wasn't the person who initiated the Luindi celebration or agricultural celebration, but rather it was Chief Monze Mukulukulu who had traveled from Zimbabwe. So perhaps could you comment on that or just shed more light around that particular comment?
Yeah, I think at least in the sources that I have used, there is no mention of Chief Chona Mukulukulu. I think the other source that I interviewed for that story was Mark Chona, who is a direct descendant of Nangoma. And he kind of shed light on the Luindi ceremony itself and how, for him at least, he said she's the one who started the ceremony because it was connected to her powers of being able to make rain. And so whenever people wanted rain and so forth, the Luindi is very connected to rain making. And she was definitely what is called a rain making queen. And that's why, I guess in his mind and in his remembrance, Nangoma was the originator of that ceremony. And if you go to any Luindi ceremony, and the Tokalea have a ceremony, the Luindi ceremony, there is also a rainmaking ceremony. And Nangoma was the rainmaking queen.
Interesting. Okay. I guess that also clarifies that. Perhaps it's just a matter of accounting for different aspects of these stories. I'm sure there are different accounts for these things. So certainly that does make sense. And I guess I would also want to just talk about how ecofeminism kind of sounds like a new idea in the modern sense. It at least sounds as though it just came up probably through a Western influence, or the idea that women are participating in things to do with environmental protection. But clearly, through stories like Nangomas, which is pre-colonial, you get to see that Nangoma actually is part of a narrative of ecofeminism in modern time. So perhaps I'd also love to just get your comments around this idea of how ecofeminism isn't necessarily a new idea in Zambian history. What would you have to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things there, whether it's the word that's new or the practice that's new. The practice of women stewarding and taking care of the environment is not new. It is something that has happened for generations and generations and generations, and specifically in Africa and in other indigenous cultures. But the phrasing of the word ecofeminists and ecofeminism is perhaps a more recent thing than the practice itself. Feminism anyway has had so many branches of it. There's all sorts of feminism that sprouts from the original feminists, and these feminists say, no, we are this kind of feminist. And so there's always branches and branching off of feminism. And so when you say it's a new practice or it's not African, for me, it's like right now, we need to define what the African concept or practice of ecofeminism is and was, so that we can also stand up and say, well, this is our version. There's been a lot of splits in the Western world around what ecofeminism should be, with the Western feminists mostly wanting it to be about very material things and, exploitation and all that stuff. And with more the indigenous feminists wanting it to be a lot more about the connection of women to the ecology and to taking care of that, of nature, but in a more connected way, not just a materialistic way. And so there's like I think about 3 now types of ecofeminism that's kind of floating around. And I think it's time that Africans also define their type of ecofeminism. And I think what inspired us to start this particular series was to encourage us as Africans to think about our own concept of ecofeminism and put it out there if we want, because I think there's been a lot of debate. And I think feminism should be what fits your culture and your landscape and everything else, not what somebody else thinks it should be. So when we examined our own landscape as Zambians, we find that there are roles, even specifically roles given to women in our tradition, to look after and to steward the ecosystems in which we live. You would hear of I think even in the archives, you'll find records of the bee women of Sesheke, who are the women who look after bees. They look after the bees, and the bees are in a very tight relationship with those women. They do what the bees can be commanded to do, what they want, literally. But it's about making sure that the ecology, which is highly dependent on bees. I mean, there's nothing that we eat that does not come from the labor of bees, that aspect, that bee health, which is something that we're hearing now in the West, that bee health, even the health of bees is looked after. But some of those roles were specifically given to women and were hereditary to women. Aspects where women were given a particular grove, a water source to look after, and that was also hereditary. There are so many, we found so many of those examples that we felt we could do a whole series about this, but mix it up with the modern women, because we might forget that for us, looking after the environment, looking after the ecosystem was something that was literally something that was even hereditary, because it had to be passed through generations. That knowledge had to be passed through generations. But some of that was specifically given to women to undertake. So women have always been seen as stewards of nature and the natural world. And so we need to start defining our own ecofeminism.
Interesting. I think that you really have raised a very valid point, especially around harboring our own kind of ecofeminism, especially based on our own culture and the like. I think just a follow-up question to that particular thing, how important, because there's a statement you made about like what it's being called now, how important do you feel titles are to this thing? Is it really important that we name these things in such a way that now we have ownership over them, or it's just the practice that matters? Do you feel like naming these things in our own way can actually allow us to perhaps cement our contribution in, in history or in just the world at large, or is it just let's do our thing?
I think both are important. I think it's certainly important to name the thing that you want to talk about, because otherwise you're always answerable to somebody who says, no, professor, whoever it is the owner of that concept or whatever the thing is. So we might as well start naming these things in the way we see them. Otherwise, we're always answerable to whoever coined the phrase. So I think it's important that when we discuss these things, and I encourage us to think through these things and start defining things in our own terms and defining them in our own words, so that we can also claim them in the way that they exist within our own cosmologies and our own, way of thinking. Otherwise, we keep going back to this because I think we've experienced it. We keep going back to our experience, for example, with Wikipedia, where as long as some white professor somewhere hasn't said this is what it is, then you can't call it that, or that's not what it, you know what I mean? So yeah. I think for us, it's also an encouragement of let's think about these things because they are around us. They're part of our history. They're part of our practices. Let's think about them as well and call them something. Even if we just put a tag at the beginning and say, this is Zambian ecofeminism or African ecofeminism, because then, that's our claim to that. But it's important. It's also important to document the processes of how women actually participated, how women fought to be the stewards of these resources, and how they managed them, and how they were entrusted, in fact, by entire communities to look after the natural resources of that particular community.
Interesting.
There's very little information. And I think with especially us, and I'll talk about Zambia, there's so much we are forgetting in terms of those kind of processes. And that means that we're forgetting a lot of knowledge. We're losing knowledge, and we shouldn't do that, because there's a lot of value in the things that we knew and that we should know.
Oh, all right. Thank you so much for that. And I think returning to Nangoma's story, there's, I think, personally, my favorite part of the story, and I'm sure I wouldn't be the only one, is how she managed to treat people who were suffering from smallpox during the smallpox epidemic. And she managed to treat and heal, if I could use that word, more people than the clinics were able to. So that, I think, brings back the conversation around indigenous knowledge and how it still has some value. It still has value with regards to solving challenges and issues that are faced by people in communities. So now, in our modern times, people look down on traditional medicine, and as long as it's not in a box or it has some kind of label to it, or comes in a tube or a tablet, we don't necessarily trust it. So now, what would be your comment around Nangoma being capable of doing more, of having more impact with indigenous knowledge than the regular clinics?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was referring to. There's obviously knowledge, that Nangoma had, and that probably many other women in her community had, in terms of how to deal with disease and what would actually help with that disease, curing that disease or stopping it from spreading. If you read the book The Coming Plague, you'll see that when Ebola first broke out in Congo, DRC, there were more people who died, who went to the clinics, than the people who stayed in the village, because the villagers figured it out. They figured out all the stuff that we're talking about here of distancing and whatever the thing. They figured it out in the village, and the people in the villages survived better than the people who actually went to the hospitals. People in the hospitals died in numbers. So there are things that we know in terms of, and we can figure out by observing what is going on, that can help keep ourselves safe. I think you saw with COVID how everybody suddenly started finding, going back kufutikira and doing all sorts of things, and the indigenous things that we normally do when we're sick, to help heal themselves from COVID. So obviously, Nangoma had a lot of knowledge in terms of how to deal with disease and how to cope with illness when people were actually, and to keep it from spreading. And that is the kind of knowledge that I think we're losing, because, as you say, if it's not in a packet, in a tube, or it's labeled 3 times a day, then it's not good enough. This is, I think this is something I admire about the Chinese. When you go to a Chinese pharmacy in China, there's the Western medicine, and there's always the traditional Chinese medicine as well. And half the time, they will first offer you the traditional Chinese medicine before they offer you the Western medicine. And that's how it should be. We should, those choices should just be up to us. We should do the science, look at what women like Nangoma knew, do the science, and then see how we make that available to people. If we find that it's good, or if there's efficacy in using that, then let's do that. But otherwise, we'll forget all the knowledge that women like Nangoma had.
Interesting. And I think I would also love to maybe get your thoughts as well, just on that comment again about how things are done in China, where you have Chinese traditional medicine next to conventional medicine. So I hope it's not an obvious question that I'm about to ask, but what would you say is stopping us here in modern Africa from embracing such a practice, or rather using traditional medicine, so to speak? Is it just perception, or maybe there's something else that you would want to add to that?
I think it's a bit of what you're saying. Our perceptions. When you go to China and you're in a civilization that's been around for thousands of years, and which was not, unlike us, colonized and told that your everything about you is inferior and so forth. You find that they've kept their practices very much in the same way they've practiced them for thousands of years. Then you come here and you find, for example, we had the Witchcraft Act, which literally kind of demonizes anything that we did, in terms of whether it's medicines, whether it's wearing beads. around your wrist or around your neck or whatever, you actually had acts that were put in place to really stamp out some of these practices, and knowledge. So we need to also just start looking at those things and saying, you know what, maybe we need to look at these again and see what we're losing if we keep such laws in place. And then I think right now, after COVID, everybody kind of rushed back to nature, and we need to do a bit more science as well, and start putting out what is in what, because sometimes the things that we eat even have very good medicinal properties that we are not aware of. Even that should be put out so people know that if I eat kalembula, I'm putting this and this into my body, and it means that I'm actually giving my body this kind of advantage. So we haven't done enough of that, and we should. And I must say, though, that I think when I was growing up, when there was the Nutrition Commission, for example, was very strong. It was very easy to get the information on any type of food, any type of Zambian food, and understand exactly what was in that type of food. And so I think we should just kind of like go back to educating ourselves and understanding what we have, what we know. And also, I think if we take the stigma away, there was, I think, some movement at UTH where they were examining a lot of these, roots and barks and leaves and so forth, to see their efficacy. It would be good to see the results of those and see how people can use them if they're efficacious. So we need to do a lot more. And in terms of your question, it's both. It's perception, but also there was actually an effort by the colonial administration to just stamp out some of the things that we were actually doing, and which was actually valuable knowledge.
Interesting. Thank you so much for that. And a follow-up question. So I think I'd love to get your comment on the possibility of a future in Zambia or even Africa in general, where we embrace indigenous knowledge in so many areas of life, whether it's in our economics, whether it's in our health systems, whether it's in transport, I don't know, whatever it could be, but rather different areas of society and in our lives. What would be your comment around the possibilities of indigenous knowledge being embraced, and what a world like that could possibly look like?
Oh, as I said, I think when I went to China, I saw that world where there's both the indigenous and the conventional medicines are actually embraced, and it gives you an option of what it is that you want to deal with your illness when you're ill. So, that type of world, just one, it makes it easier for, also confidence in the medicine you're taking is half the cure. So there are some people who are more confident in the indigenous medicines. There's some who are more confident in the conventional medicine, and that's fine. But there are other things that we have to do. For example, in this country, which I think maybe countries like South Africa have done better, it's the laws have to be revised, because we can't even, shops like Umoyo are kind of hanging in the middle because they have a lot of natural remedies. And because of the way our law is, an outlet like that doesn't even know which license they should get, because we are so not there yet. We do not have the law that would allow, for example, if I wanted to make calembula capsules, for example, the law doesn't allow me in this country, but in South Africa, I can. So you shut down a whole industry of indigenous innovations and also indigenous healthcare that could actually thrive, because I know that there's a lot of people who would be willing to line up at National Scientific Research, get their roots or barks or whatever tested so that they could make them into capsules or tablets or whatever, We can't do that in this country. And we need to start looking at how we embrace our own knowledge, how we fit that into modern legislation, how we make the process of doing that something that is actually doable and viable for people, because there are people like Nangoma who know certain things that we should also have access to, but have access to them, if you want, in modern formats, if we want. But that is not possible in this country.
I see. Interesting. Okay. Hopefully we will see a change to that in the near future or the coming future. Perhaps
Yes.
to return to the story of Nangoma, who is our leading lady. I think even before I do that, allow me to just welcome everyone who has just joined in. So feel free to share comments or questions as well in the chat, and we'll be sure to read them. Allow me to just read a few of the comments which have been made. The first one is from Teven Smart Mukemo, who says, I am so happy that we, the Tokalea, are being remembered through her story. Because most of the time when I tell people I'm Tokalea, they are like, what's that? I'm just happy that our ceremony came from her. All right, great. Thank you so much for that, Tevin Smart. Then we have Marjorie Mono Simuyuni. I pray that I did not butcher your last name. I have since stopped saying I'm Tokalea. I say I'm Tonga, but when I speak with Tongas, they sometimes correct my language. Tell me a particular word I used is not Tonga, but Lozi for sounds Lozi-ish, okay? So Tongas don't exactly accept you as Tonga, and those that don't understand Tonga and have probably never heard of Tokalea take you as a Tonga. But it's great to hear of history that consists of Tokalea. Oh, great. So glad that Nangoma's story has shedded some light on the Tokalea people and their history.
Actually, there's an episode coming where we focus on the three rainmaking queens. Bediango of the Tokalea. There's also, of course, Nangoma is a rainmaking queen of the Tonga, but also we have another rainmaking queen in Chongwe.
Oh.
So there's a series, I think, that will focus on the three: the Tokalea, the Tonga, and the Soli, because they particularly had the strongest rainmaking queens.
Oh, interesting. And that's a spoiler for what's coming next in for some of the future episodes. Tevin Smart's comment immediately is, finally we're being seen and heard. Oh, great. So that sounds beautiful.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So just to return to the story of Nangoma, there's a particular aspect which actually raised a lot of question marks and even some, and really just a couple of issues with some of the people who watched the episode, at least the ones I interacted with, which is the snake that she kept in her house. You know, especially in a Christian nation like Zambia, that's kind of something which is like, okay, what's going on? So perhaps you could shed more light. What exactly was the snake for? What did it represent?
I don't know. I think they sell snakes in pet stores, no?
Of course.
I think if you go anywhere in the world, there'll be snakes in pet stores, and people keep them in their houses. I think for Nangoma also, it was just her own connection to nature. She had a very strong connection, with nature, and the snake for her did not represent anything harmful, but just part of nature that she was so connected to. So there was no need. And if the snake is harmless, why kill it? Why disturb it? It was not disturbing anyone. So it stayed with her. It stayed in, by her door. It never bit anyone. It didn't do any harm to anyone. She fed it. There's a lot of also, there are other stories of snake pets, if you want, which are fed by women. Again, snakes are part of the ecosystem that controls rodents and things like that when they overpopulate. So for Nangoma and women like that, it's you. Those are part of the ecosystem. Why disturb the ecosystem?
So you could almost say it's the same way someone would keep a cat so that they can eat a mouse. So
Absolutely.
why question someone keeping a cat? Interesting. Perhaps we just rush to the idea that perhaps there's some spiritual meaning to it or something to it. But that's interesting to learn. I think the next question, and I think it's one, or rather, before I ask my question, I think there's a very interesting question that I've seen in the chat from Sasha Mbilika, which is, do you know if today's descendants of these rain-making queens recognize their relationship with rain or the weather in some way? Mm. Yes, that's a question from Sasha Mbilika.
Yeah, I think certainly the two that I've been in contact with and in touch with, like Bediang of the Tokalea and Nkomesha of the Soli, Chikola Makumbi, literally, calling on the clouds. The connection to weather is extremely distinct and very strong. Even now, that connection is recognized. And if you go to, and I'd encourage anybody watching, next time they hear there's Luindi, either it's among the Tokalea or it's amongst the Tonga, or there's the Chikwela Makumbi amongst the Soli, please go. It's a very, very interesting ceremony because it always rains after the ceremony is done. Always. Wow. I've never been to a Luindi or Chikwela Makumbi where it didn't rain immediately after. And rain in that particular spot, not anywhere else. So, yeah, the connection is well known and everybody knows that this is the purpose of what we've gathered here for. And the descendants know.
Interesting. Okay, I really do hope that answered your question, Sasha. So my second and last question is one which I'd also love to pose to everyone who's present. You can always just type your answer in the chat. If you met Nangoma today, what kind of questions would you ask her and how would you want to spend your time with her?
Okay, so you know what, the bit of the story of Nangoma that we put there is just a little bit. There's a whole lot of stuff going on in the background, which is very interesting. It's kind of like, yeah, you could actually make a film. I mean, like the people who come before her, the women who come before her, are actually also quite amazing in terms of her own grandmother, great grandmother, and things like that. It's a fascinating story. Hers is a fascinating story. And I think one day when we're not focusing on the fact that she was a rain queen and just want to maybe write about her life, we'll delve into that. But there's a lot of stuff, that goes on. I think one of the things that I would want to to chat with her about is definitely her connection to nature, her own ability, I think, to commune with nature and to know it so intimately that she could, control diseases or, help with the livestock and so forth. The kind of thing that she practiced is now what people are trying to, the way she managed the livestock for the people and her community is now only being understood by, conservation farmers, and the importance of cattle and rotation grazing and things like those are only just being understood in the Western sense, I guess, because she understood very well in those days. So there's so many things that I think I would want her to unpack in terms of her knowledge of nature and how it works, because she obviously knew that very, very well.
Interesting. Okay, I see. And I think if, I don't know if I would be the last person to ask a question, assuming that no one has any other question to ask. My last question is simply, how would you feel Nangoma's story could apply to the practice of an environmental health specialist to someone, an ecologist, a forester, basically someone in the modern times who practices things to do with environmental protection or conservation and the like. What do you think these individuals and experts could learn from a story such as Nangomas?
I think one of the things that that experts should learn is when you meet someone like Nangoma or you go into a community like Nangoma's community, listen to Nangoma and listen to people like her before you kind of pull your own expertise and say, I know better, because sometimes they have much better knowledge than you do from the books that you studied in university. Their books and their notes are living, are alive. And I think it's better to listen to them and then add your own expertise to what they have, because their books are thousands of years old and they live. And sometimes we've had disastrous results because people didn't listen to people like Nangoma who had knowledge, but it was disregarded because there was no book around or nobody had quoted them or whatever it is that you do in modern science. But it's always wiser to listen to the people who actually live in the environment, in that ecology, in that ecosystem, before pulling your expert card out and saying, well, I know best. I'll tell you a story just to kind of emphasize that point. You know, there was, this was in a review of some of these projects that have been done in Africa. And there was a project that was introduced in a certain community. But that project, in that project, they noticed that all the young boys, you know, at the age of 12, had to take out the fourth bottom teeth. And this was, of course, by Western standards, very cruel and, you know, inhumane. And how can you do that? And, you know, the usual campaign started, and this is child abuse and so forth. And that practice was stopped. This was a pastoral community where they kept cattle. And then a year into the project, the first boys who were not, who didn't have their teeth removed, literally 80% of those boys died. And the experts didn't understand what was going on until they asked the community, like, but why are these boys dying? And the community member said, well, you know, when boys turn 12, that is when they are allowed to herd cattle and to look after cattle in our tradition. That is when we knock out their teeth, because once they start interacting with the cattle, the danger of contracting tetanus is very high. And once you have tetanus, which is also called lockjaw, once you get tetanus, your jaw locks. And they said the only way we could get the medicine and the food into these boys was through the gap in their teeth, and they would survive. But since we stopped knocking out their teeth, now they die. So the moral for me of that story is always listen to the people in that environment before you apply your expertise. So I would say to any expert today, if you're going to go into Nangoma's community and if you hear that there's a Nangoma or someone like her, sit with her before you pull out your expert card.
Wow, interesting. Interesting indeed. That's quite something. I still don't know how I feel about having my teeth knocked out, but still,
believe me, if that made you survive, you would do it.
Oh yes, I agree. Okay. So there's another question which has just popped up in the chat from Sasha and Bilika, which is, I see in the animation, Nangoma's connection to nature arose after her refusal of marriage that she was deeply sad about, and then a period of solitude. Does this sound like what we call depression today? And do you feel there is something on the other side of depression, like a greater connection with nature, if we approach its treatment differently? Yes, that's the question.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. You know, the healing qualities of nature, I think, are so underrated. I think it's only now that people are realizing that going into nature is actually sometimes even better than sitting on a therapist's couch. That immersing yourself in nature, communing with nature, sometimes is a much, much, much stronger healing therapy than actually sitting and talking to, I don't know who, about your problems. Nature is a powerful medium of well-being. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's a few books that I'm now reading where the West is now understanding that a disconnection from nature is actually one of those things that does bring depression about. But a communing or an immersion with nature is something that brings healing and understanding. Nature is part of us. We are nature, and nature is us. And sometimes that is the very thing that we need. And I think being unhappy, yes, about the not marrying the man that she wanted, probably might have immersed her in silent moments and a lot of reflection and communing with the world around her. And so, yes, I think your question is so valid, because it is so becoming very true and very real, that even psychologists and psychiatrists are beginning to understand that nature is a powerful healer, for especially in terms of emotional, mental illnesses.
Oh, interesting. That's a very interesting response. Okay. Personally, I've learned so much from this particular talk, this webinar, which has dissected Nangoma's story. And Tevin Smart seems to agree with me, because in the chat he has just said, wow, just wow, today's session is mind-blowing. All right, great. So glad we could blow your mind. So I think if there are no other questions in the chat, but if anyone still has a question, please feel free to drop it in there. I think for me, I would just want to say, what would be your, oh, there's something which has just come up actually right now. It's from this is a long comment from Marjorie. Yes, so it says, it's interesting how we think if it didn't come from the West, or wasn't said by the West, then it isn't good. We could judge Nangoma for keeping a snake in her home, but preserving snakes has since become a movement. For instance, Zambian snakes and other crawlies is a group that mostly discusses snakes and snake awareness. There are snake removers there who remove snakes from your homes and relocate them. Others will tell you they put the snake in their backyard because it's harmless and helps in rodent control. Because they are not Black, they don't get judged. Had it been fellow Blacks doing that, they would be accused of witchcraft. The Snake and Crawlies group and its other sister organizations, such as Helping Hand in Snake Safety and Snake Alive Zambia, are doing a tremendous job in snake awareness. But I wonder if they would have done as well had they been Black organizations. Interesting. Would you like to comment on that?
We go back to what you said at the beginning, the question I asked about perception. We need to start removing these perceptions from our brains.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to, because as long as it's us, then it's bad. If it's from them, then it's good. We need to not immediately jump to the thought that no, it must be bad, because exactly. It's a war. Why is this woman keeping a snake in it? Yeah, why not?
Interesting. All right, yeah. Great. Thank you so much for that comment, Marjorie. I think that was really, really good, really important statement. Mm-hmm. All right. So once again, I think there's nothing else in the chat, unless anyone else would have something else they'd like to say. I would like to just ask for your final words regarding Nangoma's story and today's overall discussion.
Thank you. I think for me the whole series, actually the whole series of ecofeminists is really about I think alerting the world to the fact that if not the word but the process of ecofeminism, of women taking charge and leading in regard to preserving the environment, the ecosystems, is as old as we have existed, and that we should actually celebrate their knowledge. We should celebrate their role. We should acknowledge that such things, such roles and contributions have existed in our history. And if possible, make sure that they continue, because they are still playing an important role. I think people will see in the next episode some of the women in Sesheke, for example, in Shangombo, who are keeping the waters healthy for all of us. But it's traditional, it's their role, but they are keeping those roles, and also families and clans who actually keep the ecology safe. We must acknowledge them, and we must celebrate and actually say this is good. This is a good thing that we do, that we've always done in our history. So I think that was one of the objectives of this particular series. It's to bring awareness to climate justice and so forth, but to say that we have always practiced it.
Wow, great. And it's really exciting that we still have more episodes that are coming. So I just want to say thank you so much, Mulenga Kapwepwe, for joining us this afternoon. Anyone who may not have known, Mulenga Kapwepwe is actually the co-founder of the Women's History Museum. And through her and her team, we've managed to have these episodes coming out and educating us on the various roles that women have played. So thank you so much. There's another comment from Sasha Mbilika, which says, I'm deeply grateful for the wisdom you have shared with us today, Mulenga Kapwepwe, and everyone in the discussion. This has been a life-giving session, perfect for Easter Sunday. I'd like to learn more about Zambian ecofeminism and revising the current laws that inhibit the growth of our indigenous holistic medicines. Mm-hmm. Yes, Sasha.
Thank you. Yeah. I think, yeah, definitely. I think we should start talking a little bit louder about those laws so that we change them. Yeah.
Sure thing. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's been really educative and really insightful.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Musenga.
Sure. Otherwise, so that's been our webinar for today. Thank you so much for joining us, for everyone who's watching us on Facebook, for people who've joined us on Zoom. And also, if you'd like to watch this again, you can always check on Zoom, on Facebook rather, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel. That's the Women's History Museum of Zambia. So you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, as well as on LinkedIn. And you can look out for episode 4 of Leading Ladies Season 4 coming out next week on Wednesday. And you can look forward to a recap or a webinar which would dissect that particular story every Sunday that follows the week the episode has been released. So this Wednesday, episode 4 will be out, and you can follow us on our social media platforms to stay up to date with us. And even you can subscribe to our mailing list so that you can have live updates about everything that the Women's History Museum will be up to. Otherwise, from me, Musenga Katongo, who's been your host, I'd like to say to each and every one of you, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great long weekend.